All right. Good noon, everybody, and welcome back to God Was Here. Our study of the life of Christ is recorded in the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We've been going through the past several weeks on the teachings of Jesus. We've spent some time in the Sermon on the Mount, which is probably the longest single section of Jesus' teachings, and in the last couple of sessions, we've talked about the parables that Jesus taught. We're now nearing the end of this section of teachings, and next week we'll be getting into the works of Christ a little more, Lord willing. And until then, though, we do want to go through some more parables. The way Matthew lays it out, this next set of parables, and most of them are very short, come in the same context as the parables we saw last time, but the parable of the sower certainly deserves a lot of time spent on it. But now we're mostly going to be in Matthew chapter 13, and if you want to know parallel accounts, this is also easily enough in Luke chapter 13, at least for the parable of the mustard seed. But we're actually going to start with the parable of the weeds, which according to Matthew comes right after the parable of the sower. All the farming themed parables are coming together. It says in verse 24, he put another parable before them. This is after he explained the parable of the sower. He put another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? He said to them, An enemy has done this. So the servants said to him, Then do you want us to go and gather them? But he said, No, lest in gathering the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at the harvest time I will tell the reapers, Gather the weeds first, and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. All right. So Jesus gives another parable. A person who has a little bit of land and is farming, apparently his enemy comes during the nighttime and sows many seeds of weeds among his good seed. Rather petty tactic, if you ask me. Almost sounds more like a prank than anything else, but of course, this is a parable. It's not meant to be taken exactly literally. This is not the best advice, I suppose, in trying to get your enemy's fields not to grow food, but it would be a tactic. Anyway, within the parable, they see the seeds beginning to sprout up. And the master and his servants look at the field and they notice that some of the plants that are growing are weeds among the wheat. Again, this seems like something that if you've done much farming, this seems like a little bit different than what we normally expect. I'm not a farmer by any means, but I have, worked in gardens before. And of course, one of the big jobs is to get rid of the weeds as they are growing up alongside the crops. But again, this is a parable. And so the master says, no, we're going to let it all grow up, and then we're going to separate it at the end. And that which is a weed will be destroyed, and that which is wheat will be gathered into the barn. We don't have to do much speculation as to what Jesus meant here because there's also an explanation. Much in the same way that there's an explanation for the parable of the sower, however, not going to be immediately afterwards. So we're going to have to go down to verse 36 to get that. Then he left the crowds and went to his house, and his disciples came to him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. He answered, The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. Pause for a moment. All right. So Jesus says, there is one who has been sowing the good seed. He says that is the Son of Man. He says that is me, right? The Son of Man is a way that Jesus commonly refers to himself. He says that is the Son of Man. He is the one who sowed the good seed. The field is the world, and the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one. So the crops, the wheat that's springing up, those are sons of the kingdom, Christians. And then the evil, sons of the evil one, those are people who are not obedient to Christ. They spring up as well. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. Something else about this last suite of parables that we're going to be going through. They are very much about the kingdom. And there's basically two messages about the kingdom. One is how extremely valuable it is, and two, that there are going to be problems within the kingdom. Remember that when Jesus says this is a parable, it is not a parable about the entire world, but a parable specifically about the kingdom. What he's saying here is that even within the kingdom, and by the way, if you know the Bible well, you know that the kingdom is the church, and that's something that he's going to try to indicate to his disciples, even here, but they might not completely understand. But the kingdom is the church. He says, even within the church, there are going to be those within the church who are doing good, and there are going to be those who do evil within the church. Now, unfortunately, there are many failings within God's perfect church. When I say that the church is perfect, I do not mean that the people within it are perfect, nor do I mean that every decision that those people who might be in places of power within the church are going to be perfect. I mean that the church, in the sense of the kingdom, is perfect. And if there is any flaw to be found within the church, it is not because of the church itself, but because of the people within the church. As frustrating as I can be. You know, there are going to be times where there are going to be people calling themselves the church, and they're not really the church. There are going to be times where there are sinners within an otherwise good church who do a lot of evil and cause problems for everybody around them. Now, sometimes that can be dealt with in the biblical way, which is to go to that person one-on-one. This is Matthew chapter 16. Go on that person one-on-one, and if that bears no fruit, go in with 2 or 3 witnesses, and if that bears no fruit, then go in with the entirety of the congregation, and at that point, disfellowshipping the person. And sometimes that just absolutely needs to happen. But sometimes it just doesn't, for one reason or another. And that can be extremely frustrating. Here's what Jesus is saying. It's frustrating to deal with all the people who call themselves Christians yet clearly are not. A common criticism against the Church of Christ is that you all believe that you are the only ones going to heaven. And you believe that only that anybody who has that name, Church of Christ, they are saved. I absolutely do not believe that. I believe certainly that there are a lot of people who say, I am a Christian. And yes, even I am a member of the Lord's Church, the Church of Christ. And they're not going to make it to heaven. Jesus, remember, said, many will say unto me, Lord, Lord, did we not do all these things in your name? And he will say, depart from me, for I never knew you. And that is also going to be true even for people who believe they are members of the Church of Christ. There are weeds that grow among the crop, the wheat in the church. And Jesus is saying those will be destroyed. I'm not happy about that, by the way. I don't revel in the destruction of anybody. But there is some relief knowing that when eternity is upon us, I won't have to worry about the hearts of those who claim to love me and who claim to love God. We will know that all those among us are truly those who do love God and love each other. All right, that's the parable of the weeds. Let's look at the remainder of these parables. Once again, we're still in Matthew 13. We're going to go up a little bit to verse 31. He put another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, But when it is grown, it is larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. I've run into a problem here. I'm not saying that the scripture is wrong, but I've noticed that I can't find a commentary that addresses this problem. Um, and so I'm interested if anybody has any insight on this. This is a question I'll put forth towards you all. I would love to hear from you on this. Why does Jesus say that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that grows into a tree when mustard seed does not grow into trees? Uh, I looked this one up. Mustard seed grows into a plant that's kind of tall. From the pictures, it looked like it would come maybe up to my waist or so, but certainly not a mighty tree in which the birds would nest in. So I'm a little bit confused about that point of it, the physical part of the parable. Now, that being said, even if I am a little confused on the physical part of the parable, I am not confused as to the meaning of the parable. It is that the kingdom of heaven is something that is going to grow greatly, and of course we see that happening even within the Bible. The book of Acts, it starts off as something very, very small, and yet quickly grows into an extremely large thing. That much should be fairly obvious. Now, here's something that I found interesting in Kaufman's commentary. He indicated that there was actually something pretty important about the birds nesting in this tree. Sometimes with Kaufman you have to be a little bit on your guard about, is this really meaning something else? Sometimes he's been accused of finding meaning when there really isn't in certain spots. But I'm inclined to believe him in this case. He makes a pretty good argument. The birds of the air would nest within that tree. Well, when you consider the context of this, remember it's the very same chapter that we had the parable of the sower. Do you remember what happened to the first group of seeds that were sown by the sower? It says that they fell by the path and the birds came and devoured them. And when we have the parable of the sower explained to us, it says, when anyone hears, this is verse 19, when anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path. Now, he doesn't specifically mention the birds, but he says that the birds snatched away them, and then he says, the evil one comes and snatches them away. And again, the idea of birds being associated in a meaning of evil can be found in the book of Revelation as well. It says in Revelation chapter 18, verse 1, after this I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright in his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, Fallen! Fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. For all nations have drunk the wine of passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. Which, by the way, is a quotation from the book of Isaiah, so you also have another spot in which the idea of the bird, there is something evil about that in apocalyptic language, it would appear. So, given that the bird is associated with evil in a very close parable, and then the parable of the weeds, you had the idea that there would be evil among the good. Is it possible that Jesus is predicting the church is going to grow fast, but at the same time there will be evil people who claim to be part of that church? By the way, we see that all in the book of Acts and in the rest of the New Testament. Right, in the book of Acts, they have to spend a great deal of time dealing with these false teachers that we know as Judaizers, that are those who believe that the Old Testament commandments, such as circumcision, that was a big one, have to be fulfilled along with New Testament commands. And they spend a lot of time fighting against that. And then later, you have groups such as the Gnostics and the Docetists, which the New Testament spends a significant amount of time fighting against as well. All of that is there. And certainly, if Jesus here is predicting that there would be false teachers, and that's perfectly in line with his teachings in the Sermon on the Mount, um, this should be a warning for us as well. It's going to grow fast, which is great, but there's also going to be birds in those branches. Could be a possibility of it. It also might be why he says a parable of a mustard seed, which is a pretty small seed, and then to the tree, so you can have some birds in there as well. Remember, when we're talking about the parables, the physical part of the parable does not have to match, one, it does not have to perfectly match spiritual reality, and it also doesn't actually have to match perfectly physical reality. So long as it is understood, it is good enough. Like I said, I don't think it's the most efficient way for an enemy to try to destroy you by sowing weeds among your good crops. So it's not matching physical reality exactly perfectly, but good enough that we may understand it. So it might just be that Jesus is making things not quite match physical reality. Verse 33, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till it was all leavened. This again is probably a similar message to what is given to the parable of the mustard seed, right? Parable of the mustard seed, tiny little thing causes great growth. The same thing is true in the parable of the leaven. A little leaven leavens the whole lump, as another scripture would say. We put a tiny little bit of this leaven into 3 measures of flour, and then you get a great growing of the bread in that. And so here, whether or not the birds are talking about evil within the growth, the main point of the parable of the mustard seed is growth. And the main point of the parable of this woman with leaven is growth. Now, we might be tempted to think this is merely first century and a type of fulfilled prophecy, but I don't think that's a good way to look at it. I mean, obviously, the amount of growth that was seen in the first century has never been matched for the church. But I want you to think about something. You know, you can have influence on somebody that'll last for generations and generations. Some of the strongest Christians I know come from strong and large Christian families. And often it started with one person being taught the gospel. And maybe the person who taught that person the gospel never taught anybody else in their family. But because one person was taught the gospel, let's say it was a man in this case, he was able to teach his wife. And then they had children, taught all their children, who then taught their spouses and taught their children. And suddenly you have a great growth in the same way. We are making a severe mistake if we judge our success as Christians by how many people we have brought to Christ. That being said, we should try to bring as many as possible. And I understand that it can be more encouraging if there would just be more. And sometimes it's not as much as we want. But I want you to remember something. Sometimes one soul saved is a lot more than just the one. And so I think there's encouragement there as well. All right. Let's get down to a couple of other parables which I believe have the same basic idea. Verse 44. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. A man found and covered it up. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls who, on finding one pearl of great value, went and sold all that he had and bought it. All right. Again, with the parables, it's not always giving perfect truth as these are illustrations, right? So especially for that first one, I don't think Jesus is describing moral activity. This is what he says. He says that a man was walking along by a field. He finds a great treasure in the field, hides it, buys the field, and now he is wealthy beyond his wildest dreams because of that. That's not moral behavior, of course. If somebody has lost some treasure, the moral thing to do is to try to find the owner of that treasure, right? It's not finders keepers. And if it does belong to the person in the field, then that person ought to be notified of it. So Jesus is not describing moral behavior here, but he is describing a good investment, financially speaking. Not morally speaking, but financially speaking, a good investment. I know this field has extremely great treasure in it, and if I own it, that treasure's mine. So he goes, he sells everything he has. That's really the important part here, in order that he can buy this field because he knows it's a great investment. And the same is true with the pearl of great price. He sees that? And what is implied here is that it's still being sold at significantly less than what it is actually worth, and perhaps this merchant knows that, so he sells everything he has in order to buy the pearl. Why? In both cases, it's so that you would become, you would have a greater investment than you've ever had before. And the point of it is this with the kingdom of heaven. When somebody understands the kingdom of heaven, they understand what they have found, they understand the value of it, you should be willing to give absolutely everything else up, because that is precisely what is going to be asked of you. There are things in the gospel which are very easy, and there are things in the gospel which are very hard. This matches up with Jesus telling us to lay up our treasures in heaven. I suspect very highly that the number one reason people don't get baptized and put on Christ, become dead to the world, is because they love the world. They love the things they already have. But if you truly understood, if you really knew the value of the kingdom of heaven, it would seem as nothing to you to give up all of the pleasures of the earth in order to have the kingdom of heaven. Somebody who gives up all the things they have on this planet so that they can invest in the kingdom of heaven, it's like one of these people who have found this perfect opportunity. I don't know if Jesus were to do this in a modern sense, he might say this: the kingdom of heaven is like a man who knew exactly where to find the winning lottery ticket. He didn't know which one it was, and so he sold everything he had to buy them all out from the gas station. And there he found it. Again, it's not perfect, but you get the idea. Invest. Remove from yourself the physical treasure so that you can get a much greater spiritual treasure. All right. One more parable here. Verse 47. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. When it was full, men drew it ashore and sat down and sorted the good into containers and threw away the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into a fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. All right. This one is very similar to the parable of the tares. Parable of the weeds. In the translation we've been using, tares is the King James version of it, I suppose. In this parable, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that's been thrown out into the sea. And there are some fish that are good for eating, and there are some that aren't. The trout and the carp are what's being caught in here. And all of it comes together within that net. But at the end, that which is bad is sorted out from that which is good. That's almost exactly what happened in the parable of the tares, right? The wheat was separated from the weeds. Here, the good fish are separated from the bad fish. And therefore, we can pretty confidently say the interpretation here is exactly the same as it was within the parable of the weeds. That kingdom is being placed upon the earth, and there are going to be evil people who claim to be part of that kingdom, but at the end they will be sorted out. Do not make the mistake of thinking because you wear the name Christian, you are safe. No, it is the one who does the will of the Father. It's interesting here, by the way, that at the end of it, Jesus gives an explanation for the parable. So it will be at the end of the age, the angels will come and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into a fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I don't know if I've addressed this yet, and it's not the absolute perfect place to do it, but I'll address it if we do find a perfect place for it. And that's this: the common idea, and getting much more common, that there is no such thing as hell, or that if there is hell, it is just total annihilation. That is, you are completely gone in the same way that the soulless creatures are completely gone at the end of the world. Nobody taught about the existence of hell more than Jesus. And people will say, well, the word hell doesn't even show up in the Bible. Yeah, okay, genius. No English word shows up in the original Bible, but the word Gehenna absolutely does show up. And yes, that is the name of a physical place, but it's being used to describe a spiritual place. And how nobody talks about hell more than Jesus. I'm sorry, I do try not to ascribe reasoning for people taking on certain doctrinal positions, but I notice nobody wants to say that there's no that there is no real heaven, even though it's talked about in the exact same way that hell is. Hell is real. Anybody who has driven between Cincinnati and Columbus can tell you hell is real. I don't say that with any joy, by the way. I know I'm smiling. It's because I made a stupid joke. That's why. But it is an unfortunate place. You don't want to go there. Weeping and gnashing of teeth does not describe instant annihilation. Fiery furnace does not describe instant annihilation. It is a place that lasts forever, and it is a place where God is not. You don't want to go there. Let me close out here with verses 51 and 52. Have you understood all these things? They said to him, yes. And he said to them, therefore every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like a master of the house, who brings out his treasure, what is new and what is old. Essentially, he's telling the disciples here, as you learn these things, you are giving people a message of extreme value. And we should remember that when we read our Bibles. All right. Well, that concludes this series of parables over here. Next week, we'll be getting back into some of the actions of Christ, which, of course, are mainly miracles. So I'm looking forward to studying that with you. Until then, I love you all, and I hope you have a wonderful week.